Welcome back to the Bio Breakthroughs podcast. This time I'm coming to you from the home office in Miami, Florida. Look at the tropical setting outside. I'll tell you what, though, we've got a treat today because joining us from the Northeast is one of the leaders and pioneers in immunotherapy, Frank Bedu-Addo. Frank, great to have you on here. Thanks for joining us.
David, thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to introducing your viewers to PDS Biotechnology and our targeted immunotherapies for cancer.
Yeah, and Frank, later on I'm going to ask you about going for the three-point shot because we know you were a great collegiate basketball player in Ghana, but I'm going to save that for later. So Frank, as we know, there's been a significant increase in use and interest in cellular therapies to treat cancer. But as we also know, there are certain limitations. So your focus with your team has been to find ways to address those limitations. Can you talk to us more about the medical needs that you're working to address at PDS Biotechnology?
Yes, David, I'll be happy to do that. So you did raise a very important point. The cellular technologies have proven a very important principle in immuno-oncology, right? The clinical successes with the CAR-T approach have demonstrated that if you can induce the right quantity of potent T cells, you can induce relevant and strong clinical benefit. However, as you did mention, there have been significant limitations to the application of cellular therapies in cancer treatment despite these early successes. Very importantly, for example, cost. This is quite a complex approach and always not logistically feasible at scale, very expensive. We also know that there have been significant toxicities, immunotoxicities associated with this approach. For example, we have this cytokine release syndrome, which is very commonly associated with CAR-T. And we also have neurotoxicity. We've also seen good promise in the blood cancers such as lymphoma, but we have seen relatively less clinical benefit in the solid tumors. Right, so that's also been a limitation of the CAR-T approaches, and also the durability, long-term durable effects have been very limited in this approach. So this has really created an opportunity for other immunotherapeutic approaches that may be able to induce very similar kinds of T-cell
And you bring up a good point. So I know just from my own experience and speaking with executives that with CAR-T, especially when you're talking about autologous, the process, the time, the cost can be prohibitive. You've got companies that have been pushing to develop the allogeneic, which means off the shelf, but still a lot of challenges. So is it that you saw this opportunity, this opening, and PDS Biotechnology just jumped in? I mean, what is the origin of the work that you do? Tell us more about it.
Well, so that was definitely an opportunity, but also the limitations of cancer vaccines today. So we've known for over 30, 40 years in the industry that T cells are critical to effective anti-tumor benefit. However, the cancer vaccines haven't been very effective in achieving this goal. And one of the primary limitations has been the inability to induce the right type of potent functional killer T cells in humans. Right. We also know that one of the key reasons for this is these cancer vaccine approaches have not been able to activate the right immunological processes necessary to induce this kind of immune response. And therefore, there was really the opportunity to do this. So the scientific founder of PDS Biotechnology, Professor Leaf Wang, who is a lipid biophysicist, right, very well known in the field of gene therapy, was really the person who discovered this approach to activating the immune system. What we found out very early with PDS Biotechnology was that this lipid nanoparticle approach appears to overcome some of the critical limitations of not only cancer vaccines, but also the CAR-T cells. You talked about the logistics. For example, with the Versamune nanoparticle...
Can I stop you for 1 minute?
Sure.
What's interesting to me is, and again, having worked in this industry for a long time, decades, you and I are not spring chickens. And
Right.
as we said, we're not allowed to have Jared on because 2 bald heads are acceptable. A third is not. But you mentioned lipids. So it's something as simple as a lipid that enables you to address a challenge that many have not been able to address properly in cancer vaccines. Let's face it, Cancer vaccines have been around a long time, but most of them have failed. How is it a lipid can do this?
Well, it's very interesting that you ask this specific question because that's one thing that baffles many people. How is a lipid achieving this? Right. So what we have done is, as I mentioned, Leaf Wang is a lipid biophysicist by training. Even though I'm a chemical engineer by training, my PhD was Leaf Wang was both in the School of Medicine and also in the School of Pharmacy. My PhD thesis was lipid biophysics and application in drug delivery.
So you've been at this a long time, Frank.
Right. So this is something that I'm very familiar with. But really what we had to what was beneficial to PDS was the fact that it had been studied for quite a while. It was understood what the specific limitations of cancer vaccines have been. Right. And so one of the key things that we started out trying to understand was the mechanism, and are we actually activating and overcoming these limitations? So first of all, effective uptake by the immune system. That is something that we had to ensure was occurring. The immune system has to be able to take this up effectively. But also very importantly, it has to enter our lymph nodes. Our lymph nodes are where the T cells are primed and activated and trained to recognize the cancer. And so effective access to the lymph node has also been a key limitation, which this nanoparticle approach overcomes. The lipid itself is made into a nanoparticle, not because we need to deliver anything, but it was made into a nanoparticle to exploit what the immune system wants to do naturally, which is pick up particles, right? And so by making this lipid into a particle, we exploit the immune system's need and focus our even mechanism of picking up nanoparticles, picks up the nanoparticles and takes them into the lymph node, right? And so by being able to do that, we're able to really overcome that limitation. But the other limitation of cancer vaccines has been activating what's known as the killer T cell specifically, right? The cancer vaccines have been effective in activating what we call the helper T cells, but the killer T cells that have that killing function are critical not only to kill the tumor, but also if you can induce memory within those killer T cells to have that long-term effect in continuing to fight the cancer long-term. That's another obstacle that the nanoparticle approach has been able to overcome. And now we see the results in multiple phase 2 clinical trials. To date, we have run 3 phase 2 clinical trials, each one run independently. The Versatile 002 run by PDS Biotechnology, the ImmunoServe run by MD Anderson Cancer Center, and the triple combination run by the National Cancer Institute independently. And across board, we have seen the longest survival in these patients in each of those indications to date, right? So very consistent results across all 3 phase 2 clinical trials.
As you mentioned, that this is something very simple and elegant. It's a lipid that enables this to enter the lymph nodes. Is that correct? So that can then activate the T cells to make killer T cells. Is that a good way to put it?
That's a really good way to put it. It's able to enter the lymph nodes, activates the T cells. It activates a very specific immunological pathway. So we have an elegant and simple application and training of the T cells to recognize the cancer.
Frank, we look at this vaccine as that's what it is. It's an immunotherapy. You designed it to address the limitations that others have had and they haven't worked. And we know the lead indication is a very interesting one. As you and I have discussed this over the months, there's a lot of news out there about head and neck cancer, but that head and neck cancer is not caused by the HPV virus. And yet data show that head and neck cancer caused by the HPV virus is a much bigger unmet medical need. And that's what you're tackling, correct?
That's true, David. You're correct. Most people don't realize that there are actually 2 types of head and neck cancer. We have the traditional head and neck cancer caused by alcohol and tobacco, typically, and we also have the virus-related head and neck cancers. So about 7-8 years ago, you may recall that both NBC News and the Wall Street Journal reported on the rising incidences of head and neck cancer. And NBC News actually described it as a silent epidemic because of the rapid increase in incidences of head and neck cancer. Today, we know that these increases are due specifically to one virus, HPV type 16, right? Type 16, it is the most oncogenic type of the human papillomavirus. And the HPV-16 incidences have been rising significantly. It is projected that today in the United States and Europe, the most common type of head and neck cancer is actually HPV-16 positive head and neck cancer, and increasing quite rapidly.
So, Frank, that's the lead. And you're also a late stage clinical program company, correct? Wow. I mean, that's amazing. Tell us more about the lead program and what we can expect coming up from it.
Right. You are correct. So we are now in a phase 3 human clinical trial to address HPV-16 positive head and neck cancer. And the reason for going into phase 3 is actually the results of the phase 2 clinical trial, which were extremely compelling. So the phase 2 clinical trial was run in the United States and Europe. And what we found out was that the median overall survival of these patients is approximately 30 months. Now, what this means is that if you have head and neck cancer, right, and you went on our trial, you had a 50-50 chance of surviving 30 months, for 30 months or longer. Now, to put this in perspective, the standard of care, which is either Keytruda plus chemotherapy, or Erbitux plus chemotherapy, with either of these standard of care approaches, the median overall survival is approximately 12 months. Which means that if you have head and neck cancer today or recurrent metastatic head and neck cancer and go on the standard of care, you have a 50-50 shot of living for about approximately 12 months.
So more than double if you receive therapy that the data show. That's amazing.
Correct. And what we also found out was that the disease control rate, so patients who have stabilization of their cancer or shrinkage of their tumors or even complete responses, about 77% of patients had this disease control clinical benefit. We found out that more than 1 out of 5 had either complete elimination of their tumors, or at least 90 or greater percent shrinkage of their tumors. So really compelling disease control, shrinkage of tumors, and most importantly, survival of the patients. You talked about simplicity. The patients only get 5 subcutaneous injections of PDS-0101, right? So they get 1 injection in their upper arm or upper thigh every 3 weeks for the first 4 cycles, and then again on the 5th cycle 6 months later. So really convenient administration of this immunotherapy.
Frank, you're doing it now in this head and neck cancer. And to be clear, it's HPV positive, for which there's a tremendous unmet need. But you said this is a platform. So where else are you exploring this? Because if you're able to fix the problems that these cancer vaccines have presented to us for decades, it's got to be something that we can bring and address and treat other types of cancer.
Yes, I think we have very strong confidence in the potential of this platform. As we just discussed the head and neck cancer, you may recall that MD Anderson also ran the immunotherapy trial in locally advanced. This trial was in head and neck cancer, rather. MD Anderson ran the immunotherapy trial in locally advanced cervical cancer, where they saw very similar survival results, right? In patients who got all 5 doses of PDS-0101, their 3-year survival rate was 100%. Their 3-year PFS rate, progression-free survival rate, was again 100% in those who got all 5 doses. The National Cancer Institute ran the triple combination trial in all types of HPV-16 positive cancers, so cervical cancer, anal cancer, vaginal vulva cancers. And in the patients who were checkpoint inhibitor naive, so would traditionally be going on to checkpoint inhibitor therapy, at 43 months, we still had not yet reached median overall survival, right? So very encouraging survival across all 3 clinical trials. We announced a few months ago, earlier this year, that we had filed the IND to apply this technology to MUC1 positive cancer, so mucin-1. So mucin-1 is commonly expressed or found in a broad range of cancers, including colorectal cancer, non-small cell lung cancer, ovarian, breast cancer, to name a few. And so our next target would be to apply this now to cancers that express that MUC1 protein And we had the IND approved by the FDA. We're working with the National Cancer Institute on this program as part of our collaborative research and development agreement. So we are awaiting to hear back from the National Cancer Institute on when they would be initiating the clinical trial with this program.
Frank, just two more questions because, again, fascinating. This is all about bio breakthroughs. You've just reached the midpoint of the year. We're into the home stretch for 25. What should we look for from the company in the second half of the year before we see you at JP Morgan in San Francisco? And that's January.
Well, we have a very active next 6 to 18 months coming up. As we mentioned, we started our phase 3 clinical trial. So we are activating sites pretty rapidly and recruiting patients into the phase 3 human clinical trial. So that's a major focus of the company today, is to get the phase 3 program progressing as rapidly as possible. But we also recently announced our PDS-01 ADC program, the IL-12 antibody drug conjugate. We announced that the program in colorectal cancer, metastatic colon cancer, one of the most difficult to treat cancers today, one of the most deadly. This is a 2-stage clinical trial. We announced that the first stage had been successfully completed, and the trial had met the criteria for expansion into phase 2 of the program. And the criteria was having at least 9 out of the first 11 patients having a confirmed objective response, right? So very, very encouraging that we hope to be able to provide some updates on this trial, either second half of this year or very early Q1 next year. We also have 2 other programs being run with PDS-01 ADC by the NCI, both in prostate cancer. So we have the biochemically recurrent prostate cancer. That's a controlled trial in combination with Xtandi, which is the standard of care for biochemically recurrent prostate cancer. Hopefully, we'll have some data from that trial in the next 6 to 9 months. And also, we have the program being run in castration-sensitive and castration-resistant prostate cancer in combination with docetaxel. And also, we hope to be able to provide the final results from our Versatile-002 trial also sometime before the end of this calendar year, and also hope to get the updates from the MD Anderson trial, the publication of the final results in the locally advanced cervical cancer trial. So we have a lot going on.
That's a full plate, Frank. That's a big plate. And we know that sometimes people say the plate may runneth over, but you are focused on the late stage program, and people are asking you about head and neck cancer quite frequently.
And that's very important to recognize, right? Our partnerships with the National Cancer Institute and MD Anderson allow us to focus on our late stage program 100%. Those trials are being run by our partners, and we are focused 100% on our late stage program in head and neck cancer, with the goal is to see that to a BLA application and hopefully an approval in the near future.
So Frank, you were forward on the basketball court. I think the toughest person you ever had to guard was Jared, as I know he's listening. Jared was a tough one to guard. He was a tough player. You and I are from the Patrick Ewing era, as we said. But if you had to come up with a basketball analogy here, and I know you're not going to say this is a layup, this is a free throw, this is a three-point shot, but give me your best basketball analogy. You're a diehard Knicks fan. We have a lot of Knicks fans who are listeners. Tell us about it, Frank.
Well, having played basketball, I know that sports is a lot of work, requires a lot of preparation, not taking anything for granted, right? We're taking the same approach to what we're doing here today. As you can see, working with MD Anderson, working with the NCI, we're looking for multiple layers of validation, right? Validation from the experts, working hard and putting in all the work we need to do, not just to make us comfortable, but we also need to make our investors and shareholders also comfortable with the approaches we take in. And I'm hopeful that we're getting that through the validation from these leaders in the field of oncology and immuno-oncology, buying into our approach and actually running human clinical trials for us. And so my closest analogy is really putting in the hard work and making sure that we have anticipated what our opponents, and in this case, we don't really have opponents, but being prepared for whatever may be thrown at us and making sure that we're looking at not only focusing again on just one program, right? We have the NCI, the MD Andersons of the world also moving these programs forward for PDS while we focus on what we believe we should be focusing on now, which is the phase 3 human clinical trial.
And in closing, I'm going to say this. So you've talked about this all-star team approach, including MD Anderson and NCI. So that's critical for people to know. But also when you talk about opponent, the opponent here might be convention, history, things that have tried in the past. People have tried them, but they don't work. But once again, with a bio breakthrough, the ability to deliver this and demonstrate it effectively turns these T cells into killers on a basketball court and in the body. Frank, you're doing some great work. So we hope to have you back on this podcast later on in the year. We appreciate it. And thanks to everybody at PDS Biotechnology for the great work.
Thank you very much, David. It's been a pleasure.